Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my full review of the Insta360 Go 3. Now, this is a digitally digested segment, but it's going to be fairly short, and that's because I'll tell you right here at the top of the video, I still can't recommend the Go, even in its third and most functional and most practical generation. This unit was roughly $400 US, the 64 gig capacity. Remember, you cannot actually expand storage with these, so there are 3 different fixed capacities, basically for different price points for different users. But ultimately, they're not really for different users. It's just price points because, of course, no one wants to have the smallest amount of storage with this. And this is the 64 gig model. And to me, that is the one, if you have to buy it, it's the right middle spec. But I have to say, in spite of the fact that I love Insta360, I think they make some amazing products, as you can see by the company that the Go 3 is in right now. Amazing products that I think really do give you something that, of course, your smartphone or a traditional mirrorless camera can't deliver. So whether that's a 360-degree perspective, a solid action camera, or, of course, one of the best smartphone gimbals on the market, Insta can do that. But unfortunately, when it comes to the Go 3, the first and second generation I didn't even cover because, well, quite frankly, they were pretty much unusable. Now, here in the third generation, we do have something far more practical, but I would argue it's still just way too expensive because the biggest upgrade that the Go 3 brings to the table is its little home, which basically turns it into a legitimate action camera, but legitimate has an asterisk because we're still capped at 2.7K resolution. No 4K lives in this experience. And while many people could tell me that that is something they are willing to deal with, the majority of consumers are not going to be okay with that at this price point, in my opinion. And then in addition to that, this baby monitor style docking station does alleviate, again, some of the inherent shortcomings of previous generations, like not having a display to see what you're filming, having actual solid runtime with the added battery life that this little docking base provides, and of course, overheating is so much better on this generation. However, with all of that taken into account, the Go 3 is still incredibly impractical, and the price point is just way too high for the quality of video you'll get out of it. So while this may, in its pill form, be able to go places other cameras can't, which it absolutely can, and the wireless transmission to this display is a cute feature, at the end of the day, this is still a product I would not recommend to any of you, even if you absolutely have to have the smallest camera, action camera, if you will, on the market. Because in that case, you would be much better served by the DJI Action 2. And I did mention this in my first update about the Go 3. I had concerns that I was going to end up telling all of you that the Action 2 was a better camera, even though it's 2 years old, because it can shoot 4K 120. It can collapse down to being also incredibly small. It suffers from a lot of the same limitations, but still excels, in my opinion, and actually outperforms the Go 3, and it does so at a heavily discounted price, because if you shop for the Action 2 these days, since it is a 2-year-old camera and has been discontinued, you will find it somewhere a little over or a little under $200 US. So how can we really make an argument for this? I mean, even as someone who loves Insta360 products and gives them credit for changing the game and delivering something that other companies simply do not, and that's what I love about what they make, is that not so much with the Action camera, granted, they were the first to put to market a 1-inch sensor in an Action camera, and I would like to see that further developed, more so than they have thus far, but when we get to their 360-degree products, they really make something that brings a dimension to your photography and videography that you do not have with any other products on the market. So the Go 3 just isn't that product. And while, again, they fixed a lot of issues with the previous generations that made them really totally unacceptable, except to a very small niche audience, which should be happy with this product, unless they're just interested in brand loyalty, which is not the way I roll. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like companies. It doesn't mean I pretend that their worst products are still good. And this is one of the worst. I knew that it was suspicious at launch that they had pushed such a, I would say, accelerated campaign with YouTubers that don't even cover photography related products. And yes, they want this to be something that everyone will want. You don't have to be a photographer or videographer. I totally get that. But when you start seeing people who have nothing to do with cameras review cameras, you should always be suspicious. In addition to that, just lifestyle YouTubers, personalities, YouTube celebrities covering this, generally not a good sign. Now, if they say they bought it on their own and they love it, fine. But if it's a sponsored video, you probably should just turn it off, frankly. And I'm not saying that to do detriment to what I do for a living or even what they're doing for a living. Granted, I think it kind of craps on everybody else in a way because I'm for everyone making money. I just don't want them to turn this platform into shill town. And that is what inherently starts to happen when you see everybody, their sister, mother, and brother reviewing something and saying it's great and really not reviewing it at all. So while I'm not going to show you video footage because it is actually that bad, and I don't mean that it's not acceptable. I mean, for something that looks like it would be used for, a colonoscopy or endoscopy where you don't have to be put under, I think that this does okay. But when I compare it to the DJI Action 2, it's not good at all. So if there was nothing to compare it to, I'd probably be giving this a much more favorable review. But since I do have a 2-year-old, again, a product that's half the price to compare it to, this is just completely unacceptable. Also, the connection between the baby monitor housing unit and the actual pill, they say it's rated at about 5 meters. Not in my experience. It's like once you go 5 to 10 feet, it loses signal or just becomes so lag driven. The latency is so extreme that it's better than having nothing. But I kind of wonder if the older cases that they used on the previous generations, which actually could close up and protect this, aren't really a better idea than this. Granted, yes, I've mentioned it does make it usable, but that's just a commentary that the previous generations were totally unusable, which is why they were not the talk of the town for the majority of people looking for a tiny action camera. So yes, battery life is phenomenal compared to previous generations. Video quality ever so slightly improved. I would say the stabilization is still a major problem with this, even though Insta is good at stabilizing video, this product just suffers. And yes, the audio quality is also vastly improved because we do now have, I think, 3 microphones as opposed to a single mic in the previous gen. And yes, overheating, big difference. But remember, this still is inherently flawed, in my opinion, just by being capped at that 2.7K. And then 1440 may still be the resolution you end up shooting with. And well, that's the resolution from the previous generation. So why did you even get this new product? And yes, it's cool, don't get me wrong, to look at, to talk about, but once you actually own it, as I have for roughly a month, you do realize that, especially if you own something like the Action 2, there is literally no reason to entertain this product outside of, as I mentioned earlier, brand loyalty, which is a terrible reason. And as I stated earlier, that's coming from someone who's certainly loyal, but not to a flaw. Some people would look at these two cameras and say they totally overlap. Why do you have both? Well, one is, weather resistant. The other is not. That's why. But this product, the idea that once it docks in here, you have a legitimate action camera, because after all, the form factor, well, it's there with the GoPro, with Insta's own action cameras, but the quality is not. That is the big problem. Now, if this, when docked, and I said this in my early coverage, could unlock 4K, doesn't have to be 120, 4K 60, 4K 30, 4K anything, 24. This would be better, and I wouldn't be as critical because I would tell you it's 2 action cameras in one. And who knows, that's probably what the Go 4 will be. But right now, what we're working with is really just a Go 2 stuffed into this baby monitor, and I don't see that as even being a new product, let alone something that's worth your hard-earned money. If it was $200 and the Action 2 didn't exist, then I would absolutely say at $200, this is a toy a lot of people could afford, and even though it's not great, it's $200. But at $400, there are so many options that will get you better quality overall, and yes, they won't be as tiny, but they'll still accomplish the task. And if you really do need something as tiny, I've already discussed, the Action 2 solves that problem and does so in, I think, a better way from every single angle, literally. So really, I can't recommend this as much as I like Insta360, and I think it's a cool product. Again, inherently flawed, and the marketing hype and madness that went on back at launch really should have been your indicator for that. You do not need to be, an investigator, a detective to figure out that something stinks when everybody on Earth has been paid to review this thing. And, that was the biggest red flag, but then the performance and overall capability of this thing, of course, that's the other huge red flag. So as much as I love Insta360, the Go 3 is not for me. It may still be for you. There are plenty of people out there singing praises to this camera and saying, it's not a big deal that it can't shoot 4K. And again, I'd be right there with you if its price point was $200 at this, and that's, pretending this doesn't exist. I can do that because this is a 2-year-old product. And, you can make the argument that Insta360's software is superior to DJI's, but DJI's is not bad. So I'm still kind of left scratching my head as to why you would ever consider this. Again, if the Go 4 has that ability that the enclosure, the docking station, brings real features rather than just extended run times and less likely to overheat and a display, then we are talking about a dynamic product. But right now, this was a Band-Aid, if there ever were a Band-Aid, and on a product that still is not up to snuff with its pricing. And to even think that there's a more expensive model is just, it's gross. I have no other way of putting it. So I don't recommend the Insta360 Go 3, unfortunately. It's a cool product conceptually. They need to actually make it worth considering. And hopefully Gen 4 does that. I give them credit for being creative, but the baby monitor thing doesn't go very far if it doesn't really unlock next level potential at that price point. And that's really the bottom line for the Go 3. If you own the Go 2, you probably don't need to upgrade, in my opinion, because you're pretty much getting the same performance, but they've band-aided, patched a lot of these issues, and I don't think it's worth $400 to get that Band-Aid. And if you're someone who doesn't own the Go 2 and you're just shopping to figure it out, smallest action camera available, this is still better. And anybody who tells you otherwise is just pretending that the Action 2 doesn't exist just because it was discontinued and was a flop. In fact, the Action 2 really made all of the mistakes that the Go 3 is making with regard to pricing and overall functionality. But again, it still checked so many more boxes and still flopped. So Insta, take note, instead of paying everyone to say it's good, make it a good product. And that pretty much rounds out my review of the Go 3. There's not even a point to comparing it to the Action 2 because the Action 2 murders it, especially when you take into account pricing. So any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe and please stay safe. Later.